Thank you, Elizabeth, and welcome to the candidates, the panelists, and everyone attending virtually. Thanks to the Northampton Democratic City Committee for sponsoring this event. I'm going to add one unauthorized sentence. Every day, more than 300 people are directly impacted by gun violence in the United States. June is Gun Violence Awareness Month, and it was created to draw attention to this tragic reality and demand life-saving change. I am wearing orange today in honor of all those impacted by gun violence and in response to the senseless deaths of so many. And with that, I introduce our panelists. Our panelists this evening is an esteemed group, and they will be Gail Pearlman. Gail Pearlman was a longtime lawyer and mediator in Western Mass and is a retired First Justice of the Hampshire Probate and Family Court in Northampton. For that position, she spent an up close and personal day with the Governor's Council and has watched it in action ever since, with concern for its importance in the governance of our Commonwealth. We have with us today also Bill Newman. Bill is a partner in the Northampton law firm of Lesser, Newman, Alio, and Nasser, and is the host of the Bill Newman Show on WHMP radio, broadcast daily live at 9 a.m. and rebroadcast at 5 p.m. Bill is also a monthly columnist for the Daily Hampshire Gazette. Buzz Eisenberg is a human rights attorney and host of WHMP's radio talk show, Afternoon Buzz, of counsel to the law firm Weinberg and Garber PC, and longtime town moderator of Ashfield. He has long focused on law and government and making the Governor's Council, which makes the Governor's Council of serious interest to Buzz. The format for tonight's event will be as follows. The order of opening statements, closing statements, and answering questions was determined randomly by a computer. I'll be calling on candidates in the order in which they were randomly chosen. All candidates will have 2 minutes for an opening statement, 2 minutes for a closing statement, and 2 minutes to answer questions from the panelist. Each candidate will have the chance to answer the same question. Questions will rotate through the panelists, and the order of answering the questions will rotate through the candidates. Thanks to Julie Pokila, who will be our timekeeper tonight. And though I was dubbed the moderator, in fact, the timekeeper, as any good person with this experience knows, is probably more important. She will prompt the candidates when they have 30 seconds left, and then when their time is up. If you have not already turned your camera off, please do so now. I want to give a brief explanation of the Governor's Council. I would briefly mention that the establishment of the Governor's Council appears in the Massachusetts Constitution. The council has 8 members elected every 2 years from designated districts from the Commonwealth. There's a Massachusetts statute that sets out the responsibilities of the Governor's Council. The Governor's Council provides advice and consent to the governor on the governor's appointments, on the governor's pardons and commutation of sentences, and on warrants for the state treasury. The panelist questions will focus mostly on the governor's appointments, though I'm hoping that they'll spend some time on pardons and clemency. The governor appoints judges, clerk magistrates, who are people to run the local clerk's office in the courts, and the members of the parole board. And now that's just a brief introduction of a very big job. We'll hear more about the role of the Governor's Council tonight. And so with that, let's begin.
Okay, I have the first question for everybody.
Oh, wait, we have opening statements first.
I'm sorry, the opening. See, I've already messed things up.
It turns out I am moderating.
Yes, thank you.
Very good. So with that, we'll start with Tara Jacobs for opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much. I just first want to say thank you to the Northampton Democratic City Committee for hosting this event and for your time and attention. It's really a great honor to have this opportunity to address you all tonight. Let me start by introducing myself. So I am Tara Jacobs, and I live in North Adams, where I currently serve as a school committee member, as well as sitting city chair for the North Adams Democratic City Committee. And I'm also the chair of the North Adams Public Library Trustees. I attended Simon's Rock in Great Barrington and then graduated from Tufts University and received my MBA from NYU. Prior to moving to the Berkshires, I had a career in advertising where I cultivated an expertise and focus in social cause marketing and nonprofits, many of which of those were pro bono accounts. And I'm excited to run for governor's council because of the opportunity it affords to affect positive changes for our communities and the Commonwealth. And my focus is on prioritizing the values of social, racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice in all of the work that the Governor's Council does. And to do that work from a standpoint of wanting to be a part of dismantling systemic injustice from within. I believe representation matters, and I bring a unique perspective as well as the experience to be the voice that represents all of Western Massachusetts. And I have been working to achieve community solutions for over 10 years and have been an advocate for equity locally and at the State House. I hope I didn't run over. Oh, perfect. Wow, look at that.
And our next statement will be from Sean Allen.
Sorry, I was muted. I apologize. Good evening, and thank you for having me here tonight. I'm running to be our next Governor's Council for the 8th District to represent our 4 counties, because I believe I have the best experience to be a very effective advocate for Western Mass and the 4 counties that the seat encompasses. I have been a trial lawyer for 22 years, and I've had the privilege of practicing in every courthouse in every county that encompasses in our district. I have appeared in 2,000 cases as lead counsel, and I have tried 50 cases to full verdict with judges and juries. One of the most important things the Governor's Council does is, I would suggest you, confirms the nominees of the governor. And I believe my experience gives me great latitude in being able to vet an appropriate judge. Just because I've practiced before dozens and dozens of judges for 2 decades, doing the day-to-day work in all of our courthouses. I'm committed to selecting judges that reflect our community, very much so, but I'm also committed to make sure they're qualified, they're experienced, and they're competent. One of the most important things in selecting a judge, I would suggest you, is to ensure that they're going to keep our community safe, but they're also going to treat our citizens and the people they come in contact with fairly. In addition, I'm also committed to ensure that judges are selected based upon their qualifications and their qualifications alone, and not based upon political connections and political favors. Thank you.
And our next opening statement is Jeff Morneau.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for putting on this event. I know how much time, effort, and energy goes into not only putting on this event, but also for preparing for it. So I want to thank you for that. And thank you for the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about our campaign, about our vision, and about the most important elected office in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that most people don't know about. My name's Jeff Morneau, and I'm proud to say that I'm a progressive Democrat running for this position. I was born and raised in Holyoke with 2 brothers. My mother and father both worked in City Hall at various times and held small businesses. My mom holding one of the first futon businesses in Northampton back in the day. I currently live in East Longmeadow with my wife, Kate, who's an elementary school principal in West Springfield, and my 2 kids. I went to Providence College, Western New England School of Law, and got a master's degree from Georgetown University in labor and employment law. After being in DC, I came back here to my community, and I'm proud to say that for the last 20 years, I have been fighting on behalf of working families, representing individuals, employees, labor unions, workers, and consumers fighting things like wage theft, discrimination, and unfair and equal treatment from big businesses and insurance companies. Being a governor's counselor and running for elected office is not something that was on my bucket list. As you'll hear more tonight, I'm uniquely qualified for this spot, and I'm running because I know that judges play a critical role in our community and the lives of everybody that comes before them. And I see this position as an opportunity to make a difference in my community, not just for today, but for the next decade as well. Thank you.
And we conclude opening statements with Mike Fenton.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and the Northampton Democratic City Committee. Also, thank you to our moderators and panelists here tonight. Thank you to my colleagues, the other candidates who are here this evening running for this important office. I believe that the vibrancy of our democracy is directly correlated to the willingness of good people like us to step forward and put ourselves up for elected office. So I look forward to a vibrant forum tonight and a vibrant campaign. My name is Attorney Michael Fenton, and I'm a partner at the law firm of Schatz, Schwartz & Fenton. We're a transactional firm with offices in Springfield and in Northampton. My practice primarily involves the representation of businesses, both large and small. I advise institutions on complicated transactions involving millions of dollars and small mom and pop shops on starting up their business to make ends meet. My clients are primarily located in the 4 Western counties and in Northern Connecticut, and I'm admitted to practice law in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York. I'm a proud lifelong resident of Springfield, a graduate of Providence College and Western New England Law, where I also earned my MBA with a focus on taxation. I'm also an adjunct professor at Winnick Law, WinU Law, rather, where I teach corporate finance. In terms of my public service, I've served in a variety of volunteer and appointed boards and commissions, and regularly represent nonprofits in a pro bono capacity. I believe strongly in standing up for Democratic Party values and giving back to the community that's provided me with so many opportunities. And to that end, I've been a member of the Springfield City Council for the last 12 years, serving as council president for 3 of those years. I've done all these things while building bridges and bringing people together, not dividing them. I'm running for governor's council because I want to bring that same approach to the State House, and I believe strongly in the need for a qualified and effective advocate for our region, someone who can properly vet appointees of the governor and who can fight for our region more broadly. I've demonstrated I can do these things in my career, and I thank you for your consideration in this election. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll start with the first question, which will be posed by retired Judge Gail Pearlman.
Think
And I would note that the first respondent will be Sean Allen.
you'd think I'd know that opening statements come first. The first question that we're posing for you tonight is one that you've probably been practicing on all week. Could each of you tell us why you think you're more qualified than your co-candidates to hold this position? And in answering the question, could you tell us if you do or don't believe that being a lawyer is an important qualification for this job?
Thank you for the question. So I believe I'm the most qualified candidate because 1, I am a lawyer, and 2, I'm a lawyer that has practiced in the trial court in front of dozens and dozens of judges. I know what the day-to-day grind is. I know what it's like to practice with colleagues, to interact with clerks. And I think it's imperative that someone have that skill. If you're going to vet a judge's qualifications or want to learn about how a judge is going to function based upon their background, that legal training gives you the effective experience to do so. Now, I know there are some counselors that have been elected in jurisdictions that have not been lawyers, but certainly that was the voice of those people. But I would say to you that having 22 years of experience in practicing in front of judges is a great skill and a great ability to learn, to know what it takes to have a qualified judge, a judge that's going to be fair to people, that's going to apply the law, and also having the ability to look at their background, the feedback that you get from the JNC, which is, as you know, vets candidates, to ensure that they're going to meet the qualifications and the people that we want sitting in our jurisdictions here in Western Mass. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. And Tara Jacobs.
Thank you. I actually appreciate this question. I am not a lawyer. I am the only one of us who is not an attorney running for the Democratic primary in this race. And I looked as qualifications to several things. First, my current experience as a school committee member and chair of the trustees, where searches for candidates is a regular component of the job. I'm not an educator, nor am I a librarian, but my ability to assess the qualifications and make recommendations that have served our community enormously well goes back from the moment that I began doing this work. When I started as a school committee member, the first out of the gate was to find a superintendent of schools. In my prior corporate career, I managed teams and had hiring and firing responsibilities that also have given me the qualifications, I think, to assess the merits on a case-by-case basis of candidates before the Governor's Council. I actually think not being a lawyer is an important distinction and a positive that I bring to the table. In the case of judicial nominations, there are plenty of lawyers involved before the Governor's Council even gets involved. Both the JNC that was already mentioned, but also the Joint Bar Association are comprised of 100% attorneys who are appointed. And I think, therefore, that I bring a unique perspective that can both assess the merits of each candidate, but also represent all of Western Massachusetts, our voices, our needs, and those who appear before the bench to serve justice. I don't want to go over my time, but I could go on about this.
Thank you. And we conclude with Michael Fenton.
Thank you. So to answer the first question, whether or not it's necessary to be an attorney to serve on the Governor's Council, I think the answer to that question is no. There are qualified members currently of the Governor's Council who do a really good job, and I think Tara just did a nice job of explaining her credentials as well. I think it is relevant experience. It's very useful and relevant experience. And as an attorney myself, I'm familiar with the traits that I would want to see in a judge. You want to be somebody who has the right knowledge, skill set, and background, but also someone who has the right temperament and humility to represent the Commonwealth and our judicial system with dignity and treating everybody with dignity and respect who comes before you. In terms of my qualifications beyond being an attorney for the position, I also have a track record of activism in democratic politics, service on various boards and commissions, from everything related to economic development, public safety, infrastructure. And as a member of the City Council for the last 12 years, I've also been at the forefront of some really important democratic causes, including fighting for diversity and civil rights. And so given my specific background and experience in Springfield, I think that uniquely qualifies me for this position. And I think more broadly, I would hope that voters are also looking for someone who can advocate for the region even beyond the judiciary, whether that be for public infrastructure, public safety, economic development. And given my background in advocacy, I think that I'm well suited to do that. Thank you.
And of course, we won't be concluding with Mike Fenton because Jeff Morneau has not had an opportunity to make his opening statement. So,
Well, thank you, Marissa. I'm gonna answer the question second. I don't think that you have to be a lawyer in order to serve on the Governor's Council, but I do think that the experience that you have as a lawyer and the training that you have is something that is very helpful in vetting judicial candidates. I am uniquely qualified and the most qualified candidate in this race for this particular position. I have been president of the Hampden County Bar Foundation, Bar Association. I am currently president of the Hampden County Bar Foundation. I formed and chaired the Hampden County Bar Association Judiciary Committee, where we were involved in looking at potential judicial applicants. I served on the Joint Bar Committee, which is one of the last vetting of potential candidates before an applicant gets to the governor's desk. I completely understand the process of becoming a judge, from application all the way through to appointment. I have assisted multiple candidates with applications, helped them to prepare for interviews, many of which are currently sitting on the bench today as either housing court, juvenile court, landlord tenant, etc. So I think you need somebody who I have organized seminars with the Chief Legal Counsel, the JNC. I have testified on behalf of people before the JNC. And so all of those things make me uniquely qualified. In addition, the range of my legal experience, I have represented individuals in virtually every single court in Massachusetts and in every county in which this district serves. And so that range of experience makes me uniquely qualified and the most qualified candidate for this particular position.
Thank you. And now we'll move to question 2, which is posed by Bill Newman and will be answered first by Tara Jacobs.
As we've already heard tonight, the Governor's Council votes up or down on the governor's nominees for judicial appointments and other positions as well. In addition to those votes and expressing and advocating for a position with regard to those nominees before the council, I would like the candidates each to tell us what are the other obligations of a governor's council and how would you fulfill those obligations?
So some of the other, thank you for the question, by the way. So some of the other duties before the Governor's Council that I'm particularly excited to be able to be a part of are the confirming the parole board members, as well as clerk magistrates, and the role they play if the governor wants to do a pardon or give a commutation to someone who is serving prison time. I think beyond that, it's fascinating to me some of the one-offs that come before the Governor's Council to consider. But really the parts that are most appealing to me are the ones I've already mentioned, plus the judicial nominations. They also do participate in, if the governor wants to adjust salaries and make a draw on the treasury, will give their advice and consent in those matters as well. I'm trying to see if there was any other part to your question that you asked, but for me, it's an opportunity in each of those actions to affect positive change, to drive the progressive values that I embrace and have advocated for, and to increase equity across our communities and our Commonwealth. And diversity of perspective, not just the diversity that I bring, but the diversity of perspective that I hope to assist in bringing onto the parole board and our judiciary in order to facilitate positive progressive motion in our communities and our state. I think is a really awesome responsibility and a really great set of duties that the Governor's Council participate in.
Great, thank you, Tara. And now Mike Fenton.
Thank you for the question. I think the primary duties of the Governor's Council are to deliberate on the request for appointments of the governor. And the primary roles that are overseen in this capacity are the judiciary. That's everybody from district, superior, appeals, land court, probate court, appeals court, Supreme Judicial Court, the whole gamut, land court, everything in between. beyond the actual appointment of jurists to the bench, there's also the Appellate Tax Board. I'm familiar with this organization. Recently was very active in a case in Springfield that resulted in the return to taxpayers of a little bit north of $41 million from Eversource and its affiliates for failure to pay personal property taxes. That's a very important board that deliberates on appeals for property tax and other local taxes in the Commonwealth. Those appointments also come through the Governor's Council. In addition, there's the Industrial Accident Review Board, which plays a really critical role in the workers' compensation process. Those judges, if you will, who serve under that division of the Commonwealth play a really critical role. And I think that I'd look for similar characteristics in those appointees for that area, similar to the rest of the bench for the other courts. There's also pardons and commutations, a chance that I hope we'll get more often to deliberate on correcting injustices of the past, particularly as it relates to the disproportionate incarceration of people of color. There's the appointment of public administrators and the fun job of notaries public and justices of the peace.
Thank you, Mike. And now we go to Jeff Morneau.
Thank you for the question. That's a great question. A lot of people, I think most people think that you're, just going down to Boston every now and then and just, confirming candidates and potential judges. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done and that a governor's counselor can do and should do, much of which hasn't been done. And I'll start with just saying that, some of the work is in terms of, you need to vet the candidates before you actually are headed to that meeting. You need to go through those applications. You need to look at all their background. You have to do your homework as a governor's counselor. Obviously, all of those, I'd say all of those positions that Mike Fenton just mentioned, those are all, that process for those positions is all very similar. But one of the two things that stand out to me that can be improved, and the first is your governor's counselor should be doing some outreach in the community, to the legal community, to attempt to identify individuals within the various legal communities that might make potential judges and encourage them to think about that as a career. I think that's a huge step and it's not being done right now. The second thing that I think needs to be improved and that your governor's counselor can do is to improve transparency. I mean, we sit here and I think most people in these 4 counties that vote have no idea what has gone on at the governor's council for the last 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years. And when we're running as candidates, we're all looking for votes and trying to contact people. But when it comes to transparency, as your governor's counselor, I think you also need to continue to let the public know exactly what's going on at the governor's council. So those are some of the things that I see where you can make a difference. And I'm sure we'll talk about pardons and paroles at a later time during this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And now Sean.
Bill, thank you for the question. I'm going to actually talk about pardons and parole a little bit right now, not wait for the next question. I think the second most important thing is who is going to be on the parole board. As some of you may know or may not know, it's rare that the governor's council gets to actually vote on a pardon because it has to be vetted through the parole board, and then the governor would have to approve it and then send it to the council. So it doesn't happen a lot. But currently, we have a counselor who represents our district who ran on a platform that it would be a cold day in hell before that council would vote in favor of granting a pardon or commutation of a sentence. That is something I would suggest to you that's really troubling. And then that is someone that's vetting people that will be members of the parole board that may then vote on an application for somebody that might be deserving to have a sentence commutated or pardoned. As a trial lawyer, I know from 22 years of experience that juries get it wrong, that innocent people are convicted. It happens every day, but people don't realize that. I'm probably the only member on this panel that has been appointed to represent hundreds of indigent poor people, minorities, economically depressed, drug addicted, abused. I know what leads someone into the criminal justice system. So the vetting of the parole board members is just extremely important. And having a counselor represent our district that goes with a mentality of representing the values of why we would want to grant someone a pardon or commutation is very important. And I can tell you that Sean Allen is that person. And I know that from experience. I know that from representing the oppressed. I know that from representing minorities. And I know a lot about diversity as well. I also think it's a role where the counselor can also be an advocate. You go to Boston every Wednesday and you're in a room next to the governor. I'm sorry, was time up?
Yep.
All right.
Can you not see me?
I can't, but I have to move my camera, so I apologize. I was trying to figure out how to do it earlier.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Sean. And now we'll go to question 3, which will be posed by Buzz Eisenberg and will be first answered by Mike Fenton.
Thanks, Marissa. So this is a two-part question, and I think you'll see why when I ask it. Is it important to you that local attorneys be appointed to local courts, including clerk magistrate position? And if so, what would you do to ensure geographic and local representation? The second part to that question is, if a nominee is a local person who's well-liked and respected in the community, but you felt lacked certain qualifications that you think are important for the position, how would you approach that decision-making process?
Thank you very much for the question. The first answer is absolutely yes. It's very important to have local attorneys serving in local courts, whether that be behind the bench as a jurist or as a clerk magistrate. In reviewing those proposed nominations, I would look for individuals who possess the right level of experience for the position. I'd also look for somebody who has the right temperament and, as I said earlier, the right level of humility to appropriately represent the Commonwealth. How do we do it? How do we find the best and brightest here in Western Mass and the 4 Western counties? We have to work with our local bar associations. We have to work with local trial attorneys to find these folks. And I think Mr. Morneau did a fine job earlier of outlining some of the pathways that are available to us in Western Massachusetts to advocate for the region and to advocate for finding local attorneys to fill these positions. As a governor's counselor, I see the role really as twofold. You have to be proactive in identifying when vacancies are about to occur. And when you become aware of those vacancies, you need to advocate through the JNC and the governor's office, through the lieutenant governor in some cases, to make sure that those positions are posted and appropriately filled, primarily by attorneys who represent, who are from the region that they're going to be serving in. The reason that that's important is public safety and criminal justice system looks very different from a place like Orange to Great Barrington to Springfield, and that diversity is really important. Last point, Buzz, your question about what we do if a person was unqualified for the office. If you don't have the minimum qualifications, you don't have the requisite experience, being from the area isn't going to be enough to push you over the finish line for me. That's a litmus test that would be required no matter where you're from. Thank you.
Nice timing, Mike. And next we go to Jeff Morneau.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I believe strongly that an ideal bench represents the community that it's serving, and that means the local community. I know there in Hampshire County in particular, but also Franklin and Berkshire, over the past, I don't know how many years it's been, but I can't remember the last how many judges are coming from Hampshire and Franklin County, but I can't recall one that's been appointed during Mary Hurley's term. So I do believe strongly that each community is different, and that the judges who are dispersing justice or dealing with issues in the probate and family court or dealing with juveniles, each community is different. And so what's important is that the judge, whoever the judge happens to be, understands the community that the judge is serving, right? Issues in Springfield are different. They just are. They're different than issues that are going on in Greenfield. They're different than the issues sometimes in the communities in the Northampton area or in the Pittsfield area. Each community has differences that judges need to understand. And those are questions that I'm going to be asking the judge. Those are important questions, a judicial candidate. What do you understand about the community? What have you done in the community other than maybe just practice law? I think that is something that's really important. If it comes to the question of is when somebody comes up and I believe that they're not qualified and they're a local candidate and they're coming through, what I would do is I would reach out as the governor's counselor to lawyers and leaders of the bar and leaders in the community that have respect and that I know or that I'm referred to further vet that candidate. Somebody who gets that far along in the process got there somehow. And if I didn't believe that they were qualified, I would want to further understand why and how they got as far as they did before I made a decision. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And now we go to Sean Allen.
So for me, having local judges is very important, but I think one factor that probably hasn't been pointed out, and I'm aware of it because I'm practicing in all these courts, is judges travel. So if you're sitting in Franklin Superior Court, you may have a Hamden Superior Court judge or vice versa. If you're in the Berkshire Superior Court, you may have a judge from Franklin County. So they don't necessarily always reflect the community. But I think the most important thing, Buzz, to answer your question is they need to be qualified. But you have a governor's counselor that is in all the courtrooms and practicing in the counties. That counselor knows the local trial lawyers. They know what lawyers have civil experience, criminal experience, what lawyers are balanced, and what lawyers reflect diversity that may not otherwise apply. And when I said in the opening, qualifications matter, but so does the manner in which someone goes up the ladder, and it can't be political. And I would agree, we don't know a lot about the judicial vacancies. What we hear is, oh, well, attorney so-and-so has been advanced by the counselor or nominated. And sometimes I ask myself, well, who is this person? I've never seen him in a trial room. I've never seen him in a courtroom or her in a courtroom. They don't really reflect our values. They don't really reflect the community. So the other thing the governor's council could do is be not more transparent, but do more in Western Mass. I don't know if anybody remembers Bill O'Grady, who has retired. His hearing was done in Springfield. It was very effective. And to answer your second question quickly is if a person is not qualified, then Sean Allen would be voting no on that nominee. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we will go to Tara Jacobs now.
Thank you. I don't necessarily want to repeat a lot of the good points brought up before me, but I have two thoughts about local versus not and how important it is. I do see the merit in familiarity and awareness about what each individual set of societal ills and concerns are and how important that might be to have someone who is familiar and reflective. I don't think it's necessarily the most important thing that they literally have been born there or grew up there or lived there, but I do see the benefit of that when it aligns nicely. Almost more importantly to me is considerations for the diversity of the candidates coming forward, that we expand the number of women on the bench, people of color on the bench, and the legal expertise that's represented, to diversify into lawyers coming up through the family law track, the drug law track, the environmental, and also public defenders, just to have a diverse set of judges in each area and across our state. As to, I think it would be interesting to see somebody who came through the first two vetting processes and doesn't actually have the qualifications to be a judge, but in that event, if that were to happen, obviously, we don't want to have unqualified judges sitting. Did I miss 30 seconds or stop? 30 seconds. We want to have qualified candidates and we want to confirm qualified people. And I very much would vote against someone who didn't have the expertise and the qualifications and the judicial record that our communities deserve.
Great. Thank you, Tara. And now question 4 will be posed by Gail Perlman, and the first to answer will be Jeff Morneau.
So there's already been some discussion of the qualification of judges. You've talked about the geographical elements in that, and you've made reference to some general points about qualifications. And we're going to ask you to drill down a little on qualifications. You've got a lot of different kinds of judges coming before you, a lot of different kinds of appointments coming before you. If you believe that there are differences in the qualifications from one kind of appointment to another, what differences in qualifications would you name between a Superior Court judge, a probate and family court judge, and a clerk magistrate?
Sure. Thank you for that question. Yeah, we've got, for those in particular, but I'll talk a little more broadly, but yeah, there are different skill sets I think that you would like to see in somebody a judge who is going to be sitting on the Supreme Judicial Court versus the Appeals Court, Superior Court, District Court, things of that nature. I mean, the first is obviously they have to be qualified in terms of experience and knowledge with regard to probate and family court matters. So by way of example, I would want to make sure that lawyer who is coming before the Governor's Council for a position on the probate and family court had enough experience in that one particular area of the law. Whereas, for example, Superior Court, which is more of while they're both general courts, Superior Court deals with many different matters. And so I don't think that a Superior Court judge would necessarily have to have a great understanding of family law matters in order to be a Superior Court judge, while they would have to have obviously some of that relevant experience. A clerk magistrate, I'd be looking for somebody who is good with people, works in the community, familiar with the court system, and things of that nature. To me, the most important aspect where things really start to get different is when you start going to places like the Appeals Court and the SJC. And there is where major issues, as we're seeing now, are getting resolved. And so for me, when you're applying for courts like that, there are certain questions that I am just going to ask. And for example, it's going to be a litmus test for me on a woman's right to choose. Right? That's not a question that I'm necessarily going to be posing to somebody who is going on probate and family court or Superior Court. You're on your way to the SJC. That's a litmus test question for me, and that has to be answered. That they support a woman's right to choose. So it's a little bit tricky with regard to each position, but for me, the most important ones where there are significant differences is when you get to the Appeals Court and to the SJC.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And now we go to Sean Allen.
Thank you. So for me, judicial temperament, qualifications, experience, and competence matters for every judge that is going to be appointed or nominated by the governor, and then ask myself as a counselor to approve them. I kind of disagree with some of what Mr. Morneau just said with respect to like a Superior Court judge. It doesn't matter if they have really family law experience. It has to matter because the Superior Court judge is dealing with volatile situations, sometimes very heinous crimes that affects family, women, and children. And that judge makes orders very often, and I know this from practicing in this area of law, that affects children, that affects women, that makes orders that would protect them and protect their children, even in the sense of a criminal case, certainly, and even with respect to a civil matter. So from my point of view, a judge should have a balanced experience in criminal law and civil law. A clerk magistrate, to me, I call them kind of a gatekeeper. And when you've practiced as long as I have and you've represented all kinds of people, what I say by that is the clerk magistrate can be a gatekeeper as far as diverting people that shouldn't be in the system. And I call them the gatekeeper because if sometimes they do what should be done, that person coming through the system on a criminal complaint never sees a judge. What is their background in drug court? What is their background with mental health services? And determining a nonviolent offender that's coming before them and working with the police department that brings the application to divert them out. So those are some of the things I would look at. But for me, it all matters. And even a judge that gets appointed to the Superior Court judge or appellate court judge, it matters to vet them early on in case they look to advance to a higher court. So for me, for Sean Allen, all those categories matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. And now we'll go to Tara Jacobs.
Thank you. I think the most, in terms of looking at the qualification of the judges, I think if you're appointing a lawyer into their first ladder step of the judicial nomination versus promoting upwards up the ladder, you might take a different view depending on each case and what exactly the role is that you have before you. I think a record in terms of cases, whether judged or as an attorney, the record before you and the qualifications and merits are incredibly important. At the same time, the character, the integrity, the moral compass, the fullness of the person before you, and not just their qualifications, education, and experience, and what has become clear from the work they've done in the past, but also very much so the is this a person who is bringing to the table a character that is just, that is aware of their own biases, that is sensitive to the cases before them and the nuances inherent in what they're evaluating and weighing in on. And I very much agree with what Mr. Renaud said earlier in terms of the issue of Roe v. Wade rippling effect into our state will likely come before the SJC and will be very important that who we have on our panel stands up for the rights of women, as well as other issues that are going to be key, gun control, and locally we've got issues of police violence and some environmental issues that are coming before them. I'll stop now, sorry.
Great, thank you, Tara. And now we would go to Mike.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try my best to answer this comprehensively. I just want to first say that I'm very solidly pro-choice. I think it's despicable what's happening. So broadly speaking, what would we be looking for what would I be looking for in terms of an appointee coming from the governor? I think you want fairness, honesty, impartiality, strong character, integrity. That doesn't mean that you need to expect that the applicant before you, that he or she will come without mistake or error or unblemished. Everybody makes mistakes. And I'm looking for candidates who can demonstrate that they have the right skill set and experience, and they also have the right temperament to be able to see in others what we expect out of them based on the appointment. So fairness and impartiality. Want to make sure that we're having diverse representation in terms of gender, in terms of sexual orientation, in terms of communities of color, and in terms of regional equity. In terms of, Buzz, to your question about drilling down, if you're talking about, for example, an appointment to the land court or another specialty court like this, you're looking for somebody with a conveyancing background, maybe somebody who's worked in the land court before, or in a registry and dealt with land court issues. And that's a very specialized skill set, for example. District court and superior court, similar qualifications. The appeals court, you're looking for somebody who has experience preferably as a jurist. The appellate tax board, you're looking for somebody with experience specifically in taxation, maybe an assessor or somebody who has litigated cases involving property tax appeals. So I think that it's a great question, and the specific credentials are critically important based on the diversity of appointments that the Governor's Council reviews. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Fenton, or as I like to say, Counselor Fenton. I'm partial to it myself. I would go to the next question will be posed by Bill Newman, and the first question will be answered by Sean Allen.
This is a two-part question about remedying potential injustices. As noted, the Governor's Council and the Governor's counselors vote on paroles and also on commutations. I would like to know your opinion about the present composition of the parole board and what changes, if any, would you advocate for in terms of the composition of the board? A related question, what is your position with regard to how commutations are being handled, and what changes in that process would you advocate for?
So to start with the second one first, if that would be okay, Bill, I don't know of any commutations or pardons that have recently been done or presented by Governor Baker. So that in itself tells you there's a problem with the current composition of the board, the philosophy of the board. As I mentioned earlier, have a vast criminal practice over the last 2 decades. Innocent people are convicted all the time. Bad people do bad things, and sometimes they get unjust sentences. Sometimes they get minimum mandatory sentences. Sometimes they get sentences stacked. What I mean is running on and after for those people that don't practice in my world. All those factors really bear on what is the philosophy of the current parole board, how are they going to be vetted, and when you vet them, these are things that should be taken a look at very closely. And I think they're really crucial in remedying injustice if you get someone with an open mind that will listen, that has a diverse background, that understands criminal law, that understands the makeup of how someone comes into the criminal justice system. Before becoming a lawyer, I was a social worker. I went to law school part-time. So I worked at DCF now. So I worked at DSS for 5 years, worked full-time and went to law school part-time. So I provided direct services to a lot of people that suffered from mental health, drug addiction. So I know how they got into the system. I know what causes crime. I know what environmental things are. So there's a lot of factors in vetting the current members and the philosophy, but clearly I would suggest you a problem that needs to be changed. And I'm the person that has the right background, skill, and knowledge to vet a parole member. And I can assure you, I will make an effort to make sure it's changed.
Thank you, Sean. And now we'll go to Tara Jacobs.
Thank you. I really appreciate this question. And I have a lot of thoughts about it, so I hope I can get it all in 2 minutes. But where I would like to see the parole board and the Governor's Council specifically affect some change for positive. And I see your note, and I'd be okay with it. Right now the parole board is largely skewed towards former prosecutors, former law enforcement, and I'd really like to see a diversification there of bringing in people with mental health background, people with social work background, just to agree with where Sean Allen was coming from on that, and an attitude that parole is an important tool in the justice system, and that pardons and commutations are also an important and symbolic signal of hope for those who are serving and to strive for in how they conduct themselves. And I will disagree with Sean Allen in that there were just 2 cases before Governor's Council where commutations did come before them, and I very much enjoyed that cameras were in the room and I was able to watch those hearings and those proceedings. I have to admit, I honestly have no idea how I would change the process. I think being a part of it for a while will give me some insight into what my thoughts are. And believe me, I'm very much the kind of person who evaluates and then comes forward with ideas for improving processes that I'm involved with. But what I will say, just to underscore, is I was very happy to see commutations come before Governor's Council, and that I very much hope that will be a trend that continues with our next governor, for all the reasons I've already stated of how important I think it is and what a signal it is.
Great, thank you, Tara. And now we'll go to Mike Fenton.
Thank you very much. The parole board consists of 7 members who are elected, or rather who are appointed and confirmed by the Governor's Council for 5-year terms. I support that system, and I think it offers us an opportunity, unlike the judiciary, which are lifetime appointments, the parole board, which has much greater discretion over the decisions that they make for pardons and clemency otherwise, that the Governor's Council and the governor have an opportunity to review the decisions that they're making, which, as I said, I think they have great discretion and latitude in. I generally support the governor's clemency guidelines, which put into writing in 2020, set forth at least a written standard for what the governor is looking for from the parole board in terms of clemency in the form of a pardon or commutation. I think that there are some nice aspects to that, specifically the process for gathering input, including with the victim, the prosecutor's office, and the law enforcement agency that investigated the crime. There's 2 things that concern me about those guidelines. One being the clear and convincing evidence standard, and the second being the purported requirement that the individual accept responsibility for the crime. The guidelines currently, as they're written, say that the governor will rarely consider a pardon or commutation in a case where an individual that's incarcerated has not accepted responsibility. And I think certainly based on what we know about the history of racial and social injustice, there's plenty of circumstances where we have people who are wrongly convicted. So that would be my response to the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And we'll close this question with Jeff Morneau.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. As Mike Fenton just mentioned, there are 7 people on the parole board, and they're on staggered terms, as far as I understand. And so, unlike, as he said, the judicial appointments, where when you make a judicial appointment, it's a lifetime appointment. Here, if you become governor's council, things are going to change. These individuals come up for either reappointment, and if they're not doing a good job, which I'll answer the first question, they're not doing a good job. We are not getting enough nominations from the parole board or recommendations from the parole board to the governor. That's just not happening. And if that's not happening, doesn't matter who the governor is, because it all starts with the parole board. If the parole board isn't bringing anything to the governor can't bring anything to the governor's council to vote on. So I think you almost can wipe out the parole board. They're not doing hearings, and so you have to have some changes. The process and procedure is too cumbersome. I think in the last 20 years, we had Governor Mitt Romney. I think it was 0. One of the most progressive governors that we've had in the last 20 years, I think had 6 pardons and 1 commutation. And now we've just recently had a couple. And I think, as you know, Bill, and a lot of other people, you compare this to other states. I think I looked up recently, Connecticut had something like 700 or something like that in 1 year back in 2018. Why is this not happening? Why are not more people coming up for the possibility of a pardon or parole? It's an institutional problem that's been going on here in Massachusetts for way, way, way too long. And changes need to be made. And so one of the ideas that I have is you have to work with local legislators, with the legislation. You've got to go through and try to make those changes from an institutional standpoint in order to get more opportunity. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jeff. I'm going to interrupt just briefly here. I've heard back from two of the candidates. I posed the question of whether or not candidates would be okay going over 10 minutes, over an additional 10 minutes. And just want to check in. We can complete the whole round of questionings if we could be allowed 10 minutes. And it's very unlikely that Celtics are going to lose it in the first 10 minutes. So you can just chat in the chat box, indicate to me if that's a real problem for you. Otherwise, we'll continue unless I hear a hard stop from somebody. So with that said, the next question is going to be posed by Buzz, and Tara Jacobs will be the first to answer.
So the role of the Governor's Council, your judgment is perhaps the most important tool in your toolbox. And given that you represent your constituents in the 8th District, do you believe that your votes should reflect what you believe your constituents would want and the generalized community culture that they might reflect? Or were you elected to exercise your own best judgment regardless of what your constituents might think? I think it's Tara. Yeah.
Yes.
It
Thank
does,
you.
Tara.
Thank you for the question. I was struggling to get my mute button unmuted. I think that's a really great question. And thinking about it through the lens of, as a school committee member, sort of a similar, using your judgment versus the voice of your constituency. I think it's super important to be an engaged listener and to factor in the needs and concerns of your constituency. At the same time, your constituency has voted for you and put you into the role, in this case, Governor's Council, to do that work and to use your best judgment. And where I think it's important is not only as a Governor's Counselor to be connected with your communities and actively listening and engaging, but also in a case-by-case basis to do your best to promote the fact that there is a local judicial nomination or what have you that is locally relevant, and engage your community to share their views, positive and negative, so that you can consider that and factor that in, but not rely on that in making your decision. Ultimately, at the end of the day, as an elected member of the Governor's Council, my judgment is what they are voting me into the role to use, and that's what I would be doing. I hope I answered your question.
Great, thank you, Tara. And now we'll go to Mike Fenton.
Thanks. I really like this question, Buzz. As I understand it, you're describing the difference between the political trustee versus the political delegate model. The delegate model being the circumstance in which, forget representative democracy, I'm just going to do what my constituents would like me to do. The trustee model being, you've trusted me with this position and you expect that I'm going to use my reasonable judgment after vetting and taking input from the community. In my elected office, I have always subscribed to the trustee model, not the delegate model. And so what that means is I put forward what I believe is in the best interest of my constituents, and not because that's what they tell me is best for them. If we only subscribe to the delegate model in this country, we wouldn't have gotten things like gay marriage, desegregation, civil rights. Some of the biggest achievements of our democracy have been as a result of legislators and jurists, most legislators in this case, because we're talking about elected government, stepping forward and saying that they believe strongly in the trustee model and that this is the right thing to do. So that's the model that I've always prescribed to and would continue to as a member of the Governor's Council. I think that in terms of hearing from constituents and using their voices, the best way to do that is to gain a diversity of perspectives, to hear people who are coming from different backgrounds, to better inform my ultimate judgment as the person who's been entrusted with this power on behalf of the voters. And so that's the approach that I would take, and it is the approach that I've taken in my elected life.
Great, thank you, Mike. And now we'll go to Jeff Morneau.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I think Mike answered that question really well. I think I agree with a lot of what he said. Some of the things that I would do with regard to that are some of the things that I have done in the past and that I've seen done by other governors, counselors in terms of getting information from other people, is to have these local governors, counselors hearings out here in Western Massachusetts for Western Massachusetts, Hampden, Hampshire, Franklin, Berkshire candidates that are going to become judges, so that the people that we're serving are at a minimum going to have an opportunity to provide some type of input, to gather that information, to see the candidate themselves, to be part of the process. It goes back a little bit to the transparency, to let the people that we're elected to serve know what's going on, so that they can at least have a real opportunity to provide input on these very important positions, the judges that are going to be serving in their community for a long period of time. At the end of the day, ultimately, it is the governor's counselor's vote that matters. But you do need to gather, as Mike said, I think you gather as much information as you can from the constituents for any of these positions. And so some of those are some of the ideas that I would bring back that were in place before our current governor's counselor was there. And that's the end of that. That's the end of that answer. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Jeff. And now we'll go to Sean Allen.
Thanks, Buzz. So I think it's also a good question. This model, that model, and I think what your question goes to is the politics of the position. And this is why this position is so important, is to not have a political favor in it. We're elected by you people, the voters, and that's based upon what you want, your values, and your views. So that is what your counselor should have to vet for you as the voters, not what they see as what is in their best judgment for the voters. And sometimes, Buzz, that happens. You get a qualified candidate, but the local counselor doesn't like the candidate or isn't in the political trench with the candidate, and that candidate gets thwarted. It happens all the time. Whether you want to believe it or not, it happens all the time. That's not going to happen with Sean Allen, because Sean Allen is going to make sure the qualified candidate gets vetted and a candidate that reflects the views of the voters that sends him to Boston to do this job. So it's the constituents' view that really matters. It's not my view, but I can tell you it's also really imperative to make sure your counselor has the right skills to vet the judge, to vet the candidate, to ensure that the qualities that our constituents want are in that particular judge. And I can suggest you my 22 years as a trial lawyer, trying cases, representing victims, representing people that have committed crimes, representing many people in civil rights actions in federal court. I know the ins and the outs, from drug court to mental health court. So I'm going to use those skills, and I'm going to use them, though, to vet applicants with the qualities that my constituents want that send me to Boston. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. So the next question is going to go to Gail Pearlman. I will just interject briefly to say we want you to use all your time, but we are running a little over time. So, and I think it's really important that we hear the answers to all the questions. So I would just urge you to be succinct in your answers, as much as I hated that when I was a candidate, being told that. So use your time, but also be aware. So with Gail Pearlman, and Mike Fenton will be the first to answer.
Okay, I'm just going to take a little bit of license here because of the time and take my questions out of order. So even though the governor's counselors are free to think and act independently in carrying out their role, still it's a group of people who act together, who talk together, who deliberate together, who share ideas, interact, and often disagree among themselves. Can you tell us a little about your experience working in groups, handling group conflict, handling yourself in situations of conflict and what you could bring to the council on those scores.
Thank you, Judge. I could answer this one in 10 seconds. I am one of 5 children. I have 4 younger sisters, and I've been a member of the Springfield City Council for 12 years. So very adept and familiar at consensus building, dealing with dispute, and recognizing that when you're a part of a body that's making a collective decision and the decision lies with the body, that you really need to build bridges, not burn them. You need to build consensus. That requires establishing relationships, conducting yourself with respect and dignity, and treating others the same way. And I think that those are the 2 most relevant life experiences I would point to in terms of my ability to work in groups and understand what it's like to have to get a majority to make a decision. Thank you.
True to politician form, you promised 10 seconds and then went about 45, but thank you for that pithy answer. Mike, and next we'll go to Jeff Morneau.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'll try to be brief as well, but I won't limit myself to a certain number of seconds so that I don't get yelled at by Marissa. So I think everybody here has had, opportunities to and experience working in groups and working with other peoples and dealing with confrontation. We're all lawyers. I think the Governor's Council, as we all know, is a very unique group. There is a lot of problems on that council right now. We all read about the disputes, the arguing. It's really childish. My experiences come from being, among other things, president of the Hampden County Bar Association, where I've worked with a large group of lawyers on a variety of different issues along the way. And of course, we don't always agree. And you just try, as Mike said, you try to build consensus. And if you disagree, you do it respectfully, just like you would treat opposing counsel with a different view, or a judge who issues you an opinion that isn't in your favor. You don't, slam your briefcase and turn around and walk out like the governor's counselors are doing now. So you need to have, I think, a unique personality of being able to bring people together for a particular cause, and having respect for people who disagree with you or what you stand for, either politically or on behalf of a candidate. And I've been doing that, my whole life. I've worked with teams, I've coached teams. I've been part of large groups of class action lawyers on a variety of cases along the way, where the lawyers don't always agree with what's going on, but you've got to find a way to do everything respectfully. So I probably used up all of my 2 minutes, but I think it's a unique skill and trait that I have. Thank you.
Entirely your prerogative to use up your 2 minutes. All right. So Jeff, now we'll go to Sean Allen.
And I'm not giving you any time limits, Marissa. So I would suggest to you my background really has allowed me to work with a diverse groups. As a social worker, dealt with multiple groups, conflicts, dealt with a lot of sensitive issues, sexual abuse, domestic violence. And as an attorney, I don't know if anybody in the panel has ever represented defendants that face a life sentence with 3 or 4 other lawyers, and you have to make judgment calls. You have to earn the respect of the defense team, and you have the lives of people in your hands. It can be very difficult. I've built a reputation of being able to do that. I have a proven record in a courtroom of being able to do it. And I suggest you, my colleagues would tell you I can do it. And all those skills can be transferred into working with the other members of the council. But it has to be based upon respect. You have to earn respect. It's give and take. But I certainly have the skills and the background to catapult them from my years as a lawyer, my years as a social worker, into being your next governor's counselor. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. And before I call on Tara, I would just note to the candidates that we are going to move ahead to closings after Tara's answer. So Tara.
Thank you. I think it's a great question. It's highly relevant for this particular position. I have a lifetime of collaboration and working in groups that some have been more affable and some have been higher conflict. But I have always embraced a philosophy of being very clear about my standards and desired outcome, and doing what I can to find compromise and work towards the solution that's going to create the change we want to see, and not take personally those who A, disagree, or B, communicate in a way that is sort of less positive than it could be. I'll say it that way. Currently, my current life as chair of trustees, as city chair of the Dems in North Adams and on the school committee, those all are highly collaborative positions and experiences. And I always seek to find the opportunities to connect and align with my fellow committee members, or whatever organization it tends to be, so that we can come together and do the things that are going to be positive for our community and leave aside whatever. Okay. I will stop.
Thank you, Tara. And we will move forward to closing remarks. We'll start with Mike Finn.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the panelists, the Northampton Democratic City Committee for hosting this event. Also like to thank all the viewers at home and the other candidates here tonight for providing your important perspective to this race. As a transactional lawyer, I have experience that's necessary to evaluate the governor's nominees. As a Democratic activist with over a decade of experience in Springfield government, I also have the skills needed to bring people together and to advocate forcefully for our region to ensure that judicial vacancies are filled timely and with individuals who come from diverse backgrounds and experiences. I've been a member of the Springfield City Council for the last 12 years, serving as council president for 3, and I've played a leadership role in some of the most important and complicated projects that our city's faced over the last decade, including leading casino negotiations, pension reform, and working through the appellate tax board to require that our utilities pay their fair share of taxes. I've also led the fight to stop a biomass incinerator from being sited in one of the poorest communities in the Commonwealth, who at the time had an F rating for air quality from the American Lung Association. We took that case to the highest court in Massachusetts as well. When it comes time to decide who you will vote for in this Democratic primary, I hope you'll consider that there are 2 primary functions that you should seek in your governor's counselor. First, you should want someone who has the ability to fairly and impartially evaluate nominees of the governor. I think I have that skill. Second, you should look for someone who has the background and skills to fight for our region more broadly, whether that be through infrastructure, public safety, or economic development. This office offers an opportunity to be right down the hall from the governor. I think I've proven that I can do both of these things effectively, and that's why I'm running for this seat, because I believe I can make a meaningful difference for our community. Thank you so much for this opportunity tonight, and I ask for your vote on September 6th. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Mike. And now we go to Jeff Morneau.
Thank you. In conclusion, I'd just like to thank you all again for the opportunity tonight to educate you about our campaign, what we stand for, the topics that we're going to advocate for. You know, in thinking about this, nobody really thinks about judges until one of 3 things happens. Either the person has to go to court, a friend or family member has to go to court, or there's an issue that's so important to you that's being decided by the court. And then, and only then, do you ask, one of the first questions you ask is, who's the judge? The judges play a critical role in our community, whether it be bail and sentencing, whether it be child support or custody issue, whether it be landlord and tenants' rights. The justice that somebody is going to get begins and ends with the judge. And when it comes to these basically lifetime appointments, judges who are serving for 20, 25 years in our community, we've got to get it right. And they can't do it. You got to get it right before. You can't get it right after. We all know the qualities of a judge. We've talked about them. They're written into the guidelines. You've got to have the intellect, the temperament, et cetera, et cetera. We've all talked about that. But we have to get the best. We can't do it. We have to do it based on merit. We can't do it based on politics. I'm the candidate to help all of us. I have already outlined the experience that I have in all 4 counties, in virtually every court, from juvenile court, housing court, district court, probate and family court, superior court, appeals court, SJC, federal court, First Circuit Court of Appeals. I have represented people in every single court within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I ask for your vote on September 6th, and I ask for your support, and visit jeffmorneau.com. Thank you and have a great night.
Thank you, Jeff. And now we'll go to Tara Jacobs.
Thank you. I want to thank you all again for those really insightful questions and for giving us the time to share with you our messages. I just want to close by saying that I bring a unique perspective and skill set to the work of the Governor's Council that I do believe will best serve the needs of all of Western Massachusetts. I am distinctly different in several key ways. I'm the only woman running and hope to maintain the current gender equity of the Governor's Council while it strives to achieve gender balance. I'm the only Berkshire resident running, which provides me with a unique understanding that while we have many needs and concerns in Western Massachusetts in common, we are also filled with unique communities, each with their own needs and concerns. And I intend to represent the district from the far western edge of Western Massachusetts eastwards and include all of us and our perspectives. I'm the only candidate who's not an attorney, which is important for a few reasons. The judicial nomination process is initially vetted, as I had mentioned earlier in one of my answers, by 2 separate committees, and each are 100% made up of attorneys appointed to those positions. So the legal perspective, from my view, is very well represented, and I can remain fully impartial and independent in assessing the merits of each case. In terms of the politics and insider relationships, I am an outsider bringing a perspective that is free from prior relationships. And my focus will be on confirming candidates to the judiciary who not only present the best qualifications, but the character to best serve our communities and make decisions that balance justice and fairness. So I appreciate your time and attention and ask for your support and for your vote on September 6th. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tara. And we'll close out closing statements with Sean Allen.
So I also thank the committee and my fellow candidates. As you probably can imagine, it's not easy running for office and putting yourself out there to the public. But I think the contrast tonight was pretty clear, and I would suggest to you the single most important thing your Governor's Council is going to do is to vet judges. And I would suggest to you, I have the best experience to do that because I've practiced before dozens and dozens of judges. I'm the only candidate here that's tried 50 cases to full verdict. That matters because I understand how a courtroom works. I understand how a judge works. And I understand what qualities we want in a judge. That experience is priceless. I'm the only lawyer here that's gone into a federal courtroom partnered with the ACLU, and I've stuck up for the rights of a black motorist who was beaten in the head with a flashlight by a police officer. I'm the only one here that has an extensive, massive criminal background. I know the bail statute in and out. I know the sentencing statutes in and out, and I know what questions to ask a prospective nominee to make sure we're getting judges that reflect the views of our community. And I know a lot about restorative justice. It's called, I'm labeling it restorative justice, drug court, diverting people, nonviolent offenders, mental health court. I know it because I'm the only person in this panel that's gone in those courtrooms and practiced in front of judges that run drug court, that run mental health court. That matters, and I would suggest to you it's the right experience. I know a lot about diversity as an openly gay man. I know what it's like to be perceived different, not to be different, but to be perceived different. And I'm committed to diversity, and I'm committed to the values of our constituents. And I would suggest you again, I have an overwhelming amount of experience that makes me the best candidate, and I would ask that you consider voting for me in our upcoming primary. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sean, and thank you to all the candidates. Thank you to Elizabeth. I want to close, if you'll indulge me, and also because I'm told tip-off is not until technically 9:15. Council President Jim Nash has informed me of that. But I won't take nearly that much time to just say this position is of vital importance to people in the most dire of circumstances. People facing the end and the beginning of important relationships, the potentially life-shattering consequences of facing criminal and juvenile delinquency allegations and convictions, the difficulty of dealing with eviction and crushing debt obligations, the pain of living with the kinds of injuries, civil claims, and business disputes which give rise to civil claims, and crucially, the only legal mechanism, one that is vastly underutilized in this Commonwealth, to allow those convicted of crimes to seek a fresh start. As a lawyer who represents clients in courts throughout Western Mass, I say emphatically that our region needs leadership and effective representation in this position. I hope tonight has given everyone an opportunity to consider the qualifications of these excellent candidates for this important role. As promised, we close out the evening in time to watch the Celtics, and I would note that the Springfield Thunderbirds are up 3-1 against Laval the Rockets in the Eastern Conference AHL playoffs, the other playoff series that you haven't paid attention to. So I would just close by saying, please vote, please volunteer, and have a great night.